What was your first job? I'm asking. Tell me in the comments down there. I'd love to know. Today I'm going to talk about every job I had before becoming a full-time musician and how it's helped me with my current career. Are you ready? Okay. My first job was babysitting. I actually had a really sweet regular gig starting in 7th grade. When I was 12, I worked every Sunday from 1 to 5 for the Culpepper family, and I did that every week until I graduated high school. It really taught me that I liked earning my own money. I liked having some independence. It was important, fundamental. Moving on. Second job. My senior year of high school, I guess I decided I wanted to earn more of my own money, and I got a gig as a waitress. Easiest waitressing job in the world. I was a server at a retirement community, so the menu was limited. I was not working for tips, and I was terrible. I was such a bad server. I never got the rhythm of it. That job helps me to this day, because when I'm having a hard day at work, I think, Becca, you've got to get this together because you're a terrible waitress and you can't go back to doing that. I'm also very nice to servers. I tip 20% always. So when I was in college, I couldn't get a job anywhere. No one wanted to hire a minor in a town full of college students. So the only job I could get was as a work study student in the Office of Institutional Advancement at Berklee College of Music. So that was part of the Alumni Affairs Department. I don't even know what I was officially supposed to be doing, but the job that I really resonated with the most was doing the press clippings. Now, this was a while ago, so my job was to go through newspaper clippings about important alumni and kind of basically create like a scrapbook. I loved it. I got to, kind of follow their careers and gain inspiration for my own. Around that same time, I also took a side gig. I worked doing the fundraising phone bank for my college, and I learned some new swear words, and I learned what it's like to be on the other end of solicitation phone calls, and it's not fun. Interestingly, the most motivated of my coworkers were people who were doing it every day because there were incentives. Incentivizing employees is obviously a useful strategy. Next, I interviewed for a job at a bank a few doors down from my college. It was a small community bank called Bay State Federal Bank. Thank you for calling Bay State Federal. This is Rebecca speaking. How can I help you? I had a little personal kink, I guess, where I just like to answer the phone and be as aggressively friendly as I possibly could just to like freak people out. It was pretty funny. Anyhow, I learned so much about people working at that bank. I learned how to budget. I learned how to balance a checkbook. I sure learned how to double count cash. The bank was robbed twice while I worked there. Once was my day off, and the other was on my lunch break. And when I got back, they unlocked the door and let me in, and apparently the robber had just left, and the police were on their way. It was wild, real-life experience. And actually, I recently used some of that experience in a song that I co-wrote with some friends last year about bank robbery. Also at that job, my other manager, Cindy, who was amazing, she noticed that a customer who was a musician was coming in and depositing kind of big checks from gigs she was playing. And Cindy marched me right over to her. Her name was Sarah. And she said, "Sarah, I want you to meet Rebecca. She's an aspiring musician. I think you two should get to know each other." And Sarah became a mentor to me. She really helped me get my start in music because of this job I had at the bank. Kind of crazy. So while I was in college, I got a second job back at school. I worked on the audio tech crew. I was a music production and engineering major, and one day I asked one of the guys who was coming in to calibrate a tape machine how he learned to do that, and he said, "Oh, I'm on tech crew, you should try it." What I didn't know is that the day before I went in to apply, the big boss of the tech crew had laid down a decree that they needed to hire a woman. He probably said a girl. They needed to hire a girl on the tech crew because the 8 or so guys who were on the tech crew were so filthy and foul-mouthed and vulgar that he, this sweet old guy in his 70s or 80s, was getting really sick of it. He thought that having a girl around would force everyone to clean up their act a little bit. I'm not sure it worked that way. I'll say this. If they did clean up their act on my account, then their act was very, very dirty. But I kind of think that they took it as a challenge. It was a weird scenario, but I learned how to handle myself. And honestly, I don't want to make them sound like animals. They weren't. They were really nice guys, and we all became friends. And Bill, the manager, he built the studios at Berklee in the early 1980s. And he was a cool guy, a tech genius. It was just really fun actually getting to be close with that group of people. I was starting to learn that any job can be fun if you really get along with your coworkers. That's what I learned through all of the jobs I had in college, which I guess is just a larger lesson about community, I think, which has been a huge theme through my whole career. I did both jobs simultaneously while in school full time for like a year. I started like getting ridges in my fingernails and fainting randomly, and I had to quit one of the jobs. So I quit the bank. Anyhow, up next. Towards the end of college, I got a job at Whole Foods as a bagger and a cashier. And honestly, of all my jobs, this one might have been the most formative. At this job, I learned that I am an empath, like a serious super empath. Like I will take on other people's energy whether I want to or not. And what that meant as a cashier at a hoity-toity grocery store in downtown Boston is that customers could come through cranky, surly, treat me poorly, and suddenly I was having a bad day. I just would spin off into bad day territory, and then I was having a bad day and would give bad day juju to everybody else I encountered that day. The other thing I realized is that the amount of energy it takes to be kind during an interaction like that, or any interaction, is so minimal, but can have such a huge impact. And, my dad calls me Pollyanna for a reason, that just simply being extremely nice to everyone you encounter is the best shot any of us have at improving the world. One of the luckiest things that's ever happened to me is that a few weeks before graduating from college, I was recommended by one of my teachers for a gig at a studio that was owned by another teacher at my school, a guy named Michael Moss, who I actually hadn't taken any classes with. He owned a recording studio, and they were recording an audiobook for Houghton Mifflin, a K through 5th grade social science curriculum. And they needed someone to sing like America songs, like "You're a grand old flag, you're a high-flying flag," and like folk songs like "Oh Shenandoah, I long to hear you," that kind of stuff. So I went into the studio one day and I recorded all of these songs, and it was like 8 or 9, and the editors had gone home. The engineer had to catch his train to get home, so he had to leave as soon as I was done singing, and the producer was there saying like, "Oh my God, the client is coming in first thing in the morning. We need to edit these vocals. What are we gonna do?" Hi, excuse me, I can edit it. And everyone's heads turned around, and Michael Moss, he was like, "Well, come in here, Rebecca." So I went in there and sat down at the keyboard and started editing my own vocals and Pro Tools into the narration, and got their package done and went home. And the next day, Michael came up to me at school and offered me a job. So starting the Monday after I graduated with a degree in audio engineering, I got a full-time job as a recording studio engineer, which is bonkers. I know how lucky that is. So the other super lucky thing is that I had been sort of secretly the whole time that I was getting my degree in audio engineering, also writing songs and kind of harboring secret desires to be a singer-songwriter. And working at a recording studio made it extremely convenient to go in on nights and weekends and time when the studio wasn't in use and work on recording my own songs, which is how my first record, "Hey It's a Lonely World," came to be. Through that job, I learned about the value of the barter system, because I was able to barter time as an editor and engineer at the studio for time working on my record in the studio, which was super useful. My boss, Michael, also just really helped me kind of launch my career by giving me very lenient lunch hours. I was an hourly employee and I invoiced for my time, but I would take a longer lunch break in the middle of the day to make cold calls, trying to book myself mostly at colleges because they paid well. And then when I did start touring, he gave me a lot of flexibility to, come and go as I needed to in order to start getting my touring career launched. A couple years later, I did this again when I needed to record Mystery Prize, and I didn't really have a crowd to crowdfund to, and I worked at a recording studio in Atlanta for almost a year as a engineer, assistant, flunky, glorified intern, and did whatever tasks they needed me to do and bartered time for recording that record as well. Around this time, I started getting into freelance audio visual tech work. And that was really convenient when I was first starting to tour because it was short notice, freelance. I worked for this company that had offices in Boston, New York, DC, and Atlanta. So I could be anywhere on the East Coast and call and say, "Hey, I have a week off next week. Do you have any work?" And then I would do, basically, it was usually 5 or 6 days of like 12-hour, like really long days. Interestingly, I didn't do a lot of audio on these gigs because it turns out everyone on those gigs had some training in audio, and the audio work was sort of the most coveted on the crew, but there was tons of other stuff to do, and I didn't feel like being in a pissing contest to see who was the most qualified to work on audio. So I would just go where I was needed, and I think that job is where my love of dropping into little subcultures really started, and that's continued all through touring. I love dropping in on a town for an evening and learning all about the culture of the town and the gossip of the town, and and then I leave the next day and I am into some other subculture for the night. I again learned some mechanisms for coping with being the only female employee most of the time. They'd say like, "Hey sweetie, will you hand me that wrench?" And then they'd stop and be like, "Huh, you don't care if I call you sweetie, do you?" And I developed this pretty quick response where I'd say, "Oh yeah, no, as long as you don't mind if I call you Cupcake." That would either result in them no longer calling me sweetie, or I would get to call a grown man Cupcake for the rest of the day, which was always entertaining to me. In this job, I learned not to overexert myself physically and to be realistic about what my limitations are. I had a few really scary experiences, especially with loading and unloading the truck. I was pushing a box. It was way too heavy. I sort of lost control of it, and something came sliding down the top, and this guy jumped out of frickin' nowhere and dove in front of me, grabbed the thing, pushed it, and caught the thing that was falling. And that thing that was falling was the base of a microphone stand that was like 50 pounds that was sliding down the box and about to clock me in the face. So that was a shocking experience, and I think about it often. All right, are you guys still with me? We are getting this video together, and I just need to stretch. Stretch real big. Oh, that feels good. Whew, okay. And now we're gonna dive back in, and I just wanna warn you, things take a sort of weird turn before we arrive at the music industry. Stick with me. Up next, I went through my random jobs on Craigslist phase. I sold beer at a football game. I had a cooler full of beer, strap around my neck. I walked up and down the stairs of the stadium. Someone raised their hand and asked for a beer, and I jogged over to him and realized with a lot of embarrassment and shame that it was a guy that I had met the week before in a battle of the bands in Atlanta, and we had gone head to head. He won, and now I was there selling him beer at a football game. And in that moment, I had to come back to myself and think like, Rebecca, there is no shame in working. You have to earn money. That was an important moment for me. I got a random job driving for a family. I learned that road rage is not a cute look, and that it just takes however long it takes to get there, and that you've got to take some deep breaths and get patient. And I also learned about mileage and taxes, because that was my first job where I was driving a lot on the books, and I was able to write off my mileage for taxes. Last of the random Craigslist jobs is that I worked as a receptionist at a very swanky post-production firm. And the big lesson from that job, actually, just sitting at the desk answering phones, trying to project an aura of confidence and of belonging. I just wanted to seem like a fluid part of the organization. And that was sort of a big lesson in like projecting and faking it till you make it, basically, which I use every day of my career for sure. Okay, so back in Atlanta, I worked a few jobs as a PA, production assistant, on reality television shows. Long hours, very low pay, lowest person on the totem pole. I learned a lot about the hierarchy of how a film set works, and that was really helpful a few years later when I was on The Voice. My next job was teaching guitar lessons to kids. I put up ads on Craigslist, I put up flyers at local elementary schools, I got a handful of students, and it was a lifesaver for me because I was broke. I was so broke. And I remember on my first day I taught 3 or 4 students, and all of the parents bought the month-long package, which was $200, and suddenly I went from having like $11 in my checking account to $800, and I filled up my gas tank and I bought groceries, and it was a big day. I learned how good it feels to really connect with someone musically. I also learned that teaching kids who don't practice their instruments every week feels like dragging a 60-pound weight through the desert for an hour a week. I have continued as a student in music, and I make sure that when I show up for a lesson that I am prepared for it and that I'm not wasting my teacher's time. That summer that I was teaching guitar lessons, I also worked as a backstage runner at a 6,000-seat amphitheater in Atlanta, just a few miles from where I grew up. This was an amazing job. I got to read all the contracts. So it was really cool seeing how all of those deals were structured. One of my jobs was to set up the green rooms per the requests and the artist writers. Each crew would come in and the mood of the space would change based on the mood of the touring operation coming through. And this was probably the biggest lesson of the whole thing. I learned that management is top down, period. And that no matter how many employees an artist has or how much they try and outsource, the artist themselves is the top level of management in their operation. The great touring operations that I saw had either an artist who treated everybody with kindness and empowered everyone below them, and that created a really friendly, cheerful, familial sort of environment. The artists who yelled at their employees, hid in their dressing rooms, were demeaning to people like me and to other people on their staff. Their crews were cranky and edgy and stressed out, and the shows were not great. Like, everything fed into itself. And that's when I learned, like, truly how top down management is. It's also cool just to see how people set up their spaces to make themselves feel comfortable to perform. You know, we hear a lot about outlandish requests for green rooms and artist writers, and I realize people don't ask for things because they want to be a pain in the ass or because they want to be spoiled. They ask for things because the lifestyle of moving around like that is disorienting. Having the same requests filled in each building night after night, that creates some kind of sense of grounding that helps people put on a good show. Also at that job, I learned that the music industry is small. I saw some artists coming through who behaved in a way that ensured that they would never be hired again by anybody who worked at that venue. And I heard what was said about them after they left. And I realized I never, ever want anyone to talk about me that way. And I don't want to ever give people a reason to talk about me that way. Also, I drank whiskey for the first time in Hootie and the Blowfish's green room. So that was kind of fun. I saved up enough money to pay for my first radio campaign. And I went out on tour for 3 months. And I gave all of my guitar students to a temporary teacher. I had tried long continuous tours before, but it hadn't worked out. But I decided to do it again when this record came out. As I went, I started getting more gig offers, and the tour got longer and longer, and I started adding on to the end of it, and next thing I know, I had another 3 months, another 6 months booked. I made the decision to give up my students and try music as my full-time job. That is now 11, almost 12 years ago. During South by Southwest in 2010, I was very broke, and I thought, well, you know what? I'm in Austin and there are plenty of jobs this week. I'm going to go get one of them. I'm not too proud to work. So I worked at an event, and after the event that I worked for a few days, the publicity company that hired me stiffed me, and I didn't get paid for that work. And I decided to interpret that as a sign from the universe that I just needed to keep on being my own boss and figure out a way to make music work. And so that's what I've been doing ever since. All right. So tell me, of all the jobs that I just told you about and the lessons I learned from them, which one was most surprising to you? Be honest. Tell me in the comments. I'd love to know what you think. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. This was a longer video. Let me know what you think about the longer ones. I'm a little shy anytime I go above the 20-minute mark. So do you like longer videos? Do you like me to keep them short and sweet? I'm still getting the hang of this whole YouTube vibe. So let me know your thoughts and preferences. If there's anything you want to hear me talk about regarding the music industry or my career as a full-time musician, audio engineering, tech, gear, anything, let me know in the comments. Next week, I'm going to be talking to a few friends of mine who have written mega hit songs, and it's going to be really fun. So stick around for that, and don't forget to like and subscribe. I know I say that every week, but it actually really helps me with the robot gremlins in charge of YouTube. Thanks to all of my patrons over on Patreon who made this video possible. If you'd like to be one of those magical heroes, you can join me at patreon.com/Rebecca Loebe, and just, stay tuned. Thanks for hanging out with me. Talk to you next week. Bye.